Wars are fought with weapons, but what if I told you that food was just as critical to victory as tanks and bullets? In World War II, crops became a strategic lifeline, feeding soldiers, civilians, and entire nations struggling to survive. Without food, armies would crumble and populations would revolt. But how did countries ensure they had enough to eat, and what unexpected foods became the key to survival? Let's uncover the crucial role of crops in World War II's battle for sustenance. At the outbreak of the war, food supplies became a weapon of control and resistance. Nations dependent on food imports, like Britain and Japan, faced immediate shortages as supply routes were cut off by blockades and enemy attacks. Rationing was introduced to stretch limited supplies, but it wasn't just about scarcity. Governments had to decide which crops were worth growing to maximize nutrition and sustainability. In the United States and Britain, this led to the Victory Garden movement, encouraging people to grow their own food and reduce reliance on rationed goods. Meanwhile, in occupied Europe, Nazi Germany controlled food production, redirecting crops from conquered lands to feed its own army. But this strategy came at a devastating cost. Millions starved under occupation as resources were stripped away. With traditional food supplies threatened, nations turned to hardy, high-yield crops that could survive wartime conditions. Some of the most critical included potatoes. Easy to grow, rich in calories and resistant to harsh climates, they became a staple across Europe and the Soviet Union. Soybeans. In the United States and Japan, soy became a crucial protein source, replacing meat and dairy shortages. Wheat and corn, the backbone of military rations used for bread, pasta, and even fuel for wartime industries. Countries adapted their diets to whatever was available, sometimes leading to drastic changes in national cuisines. In Britain, bread was fortified with national flour, while Japan turned to sweet potatoes and rice substitutes to sustain its population. But even with these measures, one country faced the greatest agricultural battle of all: the Soviet Union. The Eastern Front wasn't just a battlefield for soldiers, it was a war for food and survival. As the Nazis advanced into Soviet territory, they enacted the Hunger Plan, seizing grain and livestock to starve local populations into submission. In response, the Soviets burned their own fields, retreating deeper into the country to deny the enemy resources. Cities under siege like Leningrad suffered brutal food shortages, forcing residents to survive on sawdust bread and even leather belts. Meanwhile, in occupied Ukraine, the breadbasket of Europe, Nazi forces exploited the land for their own war effort, leading to one of the deadliest famines of the war. Yet, despite immense suffering, the Soviets managed to regroup and reclaim lost farmland, ensuring that their troops and citizens could fight another day. With traditional food sources strained, some nations turned to alternative crops and unexpected food sources to survive. Seaweed and fish flour. Japan used these nutrient-rich alternatives when rice became scarce. Peanuts and peanut butter, a vital protein source for American troops. Dandelions and wild herbs, foraged by civilians across Europe when stores ran dry. Scientists even worked on synthetic foods, experimenting with nutrient-dense meal replacements to sustain soldiers on the battlefield. And after the war, some of these emergency foods like soy protein and fortified grains would remain a permanent part of the global food industry. Food shaped the outcome of World War II just as much as strategy and firepower. Nations that could feed their people and troops had the endurance to fight, while those that faltered faced starvation and collapse. But this wasn't the last time food played a role in global conflict. If you're curious about how Cold War food programs reshaped modern agriculture, you won't want to miss what's next.